Click the bell icon to get latest videos from Ekeeda.
Hello friends, we'll be discussing few details about what do you mean about a cash memo or a credit memo. We'll be discussing that in detail along with certain illustrations for your reference. Let's go ahead and figure that out. So when we speak about cash or credit memo, we ideally speak about a kind of source document that is used for accounting whenever we are dealing with any kind of business transactions. Now that you know that in every entity is supposed to indulge in any kind of accounting transaction. When you talk about transaction, this transaction takes place between two or more person. Nevertheless, whenever the transaction takes place, it is supposed to be monitored or probably valued as per the monetary terms itself. Now, whenever a specific monetary term is considered or is in question, you need to have an evidence proof of it. Now, this specific cash and credit memo will be the specific evidence that we are looking out whenever we have to deal with any kind of accounting or auditing or reconciliation or payments of tax. So, come what may, whichever deals or whichever transactions we indulge into, or we have any other party that is indulging into any transaction with us, we have to have a specific relationship with them, and this specific relationship with that transaction will be a part of source document. So when we talk about source document, we basically talk about an evidence that we have for our reference. Now when you talk about credit memo, it is completely different from the cash memo. Some of you might think that the cash and the credit memo is a kind of refund that is available. However, there is a lot of difference between them. No worries, but the format being the same. However, there is a lot of difference between how the way it functions. It may function in a different way, and now when we talk about it, we'll get to know how exactly a credit memo functions and how it is different from a cash memo. So starting off with, we'll first begin with credit memo, and then we'll go ahead after some illustrations on the cash memo, and we'll close that talk. So when we have to talk about credit memo first, what do you think will be a credit memo apart from being a source document for accounting? That's correct. It's a refund that is provided by the seller to the buyer for any kind of issues that has been raised against the sales or against the goods. Now there are a lot of terms and conditions, warranties, etc. that forms a part of this specific credit memo. However, once this supposed or this specific credit is supposed to be procured from the seller by the buyer, then in such cases you have to go ahead and further analyze that whenever this specific credit transaction is supposed to be taken away from the seller, and that is by the buyer, he needs to have a specific credit memo in place. This specific credit memo will help him to further go ahead and make any transactions or pay a less amount as per the invoice which was earlier decided. Now let's see how this functions out. We have jotted down certain points for your reference. Let's go ahead and read them out. A credit memo is basically an invoice that is given by the seller to the buyer, indicating the details of the transactions which is done for one specific single transaction itself. Now the term single transaction itself is related here is because this is a refund that you're giving to one specific customer. So when you talk about a refund being given to one specific customer, you actually deal with the customer being refunded for the defective goods that he has brought to our notice. So supposingly, let's take an example. I am the business owner and you are the buyer. So when you talk about any services that are taken from my side or any goods that you have procured from my side, that means you need to be sure, or probably you will be expecting that the goods are of good nature and it will be something that can be used for a business purpose. So whatever business you might have, whatever terms and conditions you might have, or whatever kind of transactions that you want to deal with regarding those services or those products or goods, that is your concern. However, if the goods that I have sold to you is of no use, or probably it is not relevant to that specific purpose, or if it is not matching the cause of the business, then in such cases you have to give out those goods back to me. That means you will be refunding that specific transaction, or you will be expecting a refund from me. And how this refund will be expected is because you're giving those goods back to me. Remember, we spoke about sales return being a part of trading account or probably being a part of any accounting transaction, just like we had purchase returns. Similar to that, we have sales return here. So when we talk about sales return, this is the credit refund that is provided for all the sales which has been returned to us by any kind of buyer. Now, you being a buyer, you found out there are certain defects in the goods and you wish to go ahead and replace those goods or either seek for a refund. Now, either of this will be possible if you have a credit note with you. That means whenever you raise certain issues and if the quality check determines that the goods are of defective nature, then the seller will give you a credit note. This specific credit note is an invoice or a source document that proves that you are supposed to pay only the amount that you are liable to pay and not something which has defective in it, or the defective nature will not be considered while making the payments for the whole consignment. So for an example that we took earlier, me as a business owner and you as a buyer, supposingly I have sold out 1,000 cartons of fragmented bricks to you and one of the carton was defective. Carton price, that means each price or the price of one specific carton was rupees 1,000. Now out of all these things you have made, or probably you have made a purchase of somewhere around 1 lakh or 10 lakhs maybe, and out of that there is certain goods or there is a certain part of those goods which are defective or nothing of your usage or doesn't match your requirement. In that case, you will term them as defective and you will give it back to me. I will do certain quality checks from my side to ensure that this is something that you are already requested for and it doesn't match your requirement, and I will classify them as sales return and further give you a credit note for the specific amount of good. So for example, here you were supposed to pay 10 lakh rupees, but now that the certain part or probably goods worth rupees 1 lakh is defective, you have sold it back to me. So I will give you a credit note of 1 lakh. When I give you a credit note of 1 lakh, that means you can either use this specific credit note for the purchase or the next purchase that you want to buy from this specific buyer or from me, or you can either settle it down on a refund. That means you require the refund of 1 lakh, or either you can use it for the payments itself. Now, how can you use this? First part, the first case or the scenario, I have given you a credit note and you want to use it for your payments. That means the payment that you were supposed to make, rupees 10 lakhs, out of that 1 lakh is defective and you have been given a credit note for that. That means you are supposed to pay only rupees 9 lakhs instead of rupees 10 lakhs now. So the reason being is because the credit note that I gave you, you have adjusted it further to the payments. The next scenario is somewhere you have already made a payment of 10 lakhs in advance to me, and you found out later on that there is one carton which is defective and its worth of the value of that specific carton is around 1 lakh itself. Now in such cases, when you have already made a payment to me in advance, I have given you a credit note of 1 lakh again. This specific credit note can be used for further purchases, just like any kind of credit note that you give or any kind of credit note that you get from a store mart or a voucher code that you get, which you can buy or which you can redeem for any next purchases. So next time when you buy goods from me, which may be like 2 lakhs or so, and if you use this specific 1 lakh credit note that has been given to you earlier with certain period restriction, of course, now when we talk about this specific thing, you have to pay only 1 lakh here. Why? Is because even if the goods are worth rupees 2 lakh, you have already given me somewhere around 10 lakhs earlier, out of which you are ideally supposed to give me 9 lakhs. But you gave 10 lakh in advance, and now that you have already given this credit note, you are only liable to pay 1 lakh instead of 2. So in these two scenarios, you can use this specific credit note, or you can use the credit note as such a way whereby the reduction in the value of the sales and the reduction in the value of the payment for the buyer can be adjusted either in the current buy or in the next buying consignment. This is how you can deal with it. Let's go on to the next statement that has been mentioned down here. So the second statement says that it is a refund that seller initiates. Now when we talk about any refund being initiated by the seller, now whenever we talk about a credit note, this is provided by the seller to the buyer itself. That means it is a refund that has been initiated by the seller. In no circumstances there will be a buyer who will be going ahead and giving you a credit note, because in such cases a credit note is usually provided by the seller or deemed to be provided by the seller itself to the buyer for all the defective items that he has given or brought notice to the seller itself. So when we talk about credit note, we ideally talk about the refund that has been initiated by the seller to the buyer. Let's take an example whereby you have a credit card on you, and if you have been charged for dubious amount or probably a double amount, that means the total bill was for rupees 30,000, your credit limit is 1 lakh, however you have been charged twice, that means 30,000 plus 30,000, 60,000 has been charged for the purchase transaction which was only made once. Now when you talk about a credit note, that means a bank will provide you a credit on that part. Either it can reverse the transaction or it will adjust that amount in your next bill. So probably that means if you have any adjust payment or if you have made the payment twice here, whatever balance has been left in the card, that can be adjusted for the next purchases. So if the next purchase is worth rupees 25,000, you have already paid 30,000 additional in the previous month's bill. However, when we talk about this month's bill, it is just 25,000. So you need not pay any further amount for this bill, because the earlier adjusted bill or the earlier amount which was paid in excess will be adjusted here. This is the refund that we talk about, or this is the credit note that we talk about. So this is the kind of refund that is initiated by the seller to the buyer in different ways. Make sure it is in different ways. The reason why I'm talking about different ways is because there is no one single way to issue a credit note by the seller to the buyer. The reason being, there are different ways today and different ways we can go ahead and make a settlement with the buyer for any kind of defective goods that he has brought us or to our notice. Now when we talk about a refund, this is ideally initiated by the seller. Let's figure out the next point. It is reduction in the value that buyer owes. As I said in the earlier example, where you were supposed to pay 10 lakhs, however, there were goods worth rupees 1 lakh which were defective and we issued a credit note to him. So in two scenarios, so whereby first in the situation where the seller is supposed to receive a payment, or in the second situation where the seller has already received a payment from the buyer in advance. So in the first situation where the payment is supposed to be made by the buyer and it hasn't been credited to the seller's account, then in such cases this credit note will act as a refund in the same transaction itself. However, if there has been already a payment made by the buyer to the seller in advance, in such cases there can also be a situation, rather there can be two situations. One, if there is a part payment that has been made in advance, or if there is a full payment that has been made in advance. If there is a full payment, this credit note will be provided to the buyer by the seller and that can be used for next purchases. And if there is a part payment, then whatever balance is left, the balance will be reduced by that much amount which is considered as a defective. So if the payment of rupees 10 lakh has been divided into two parts, that means 6 lakhs has been paid and 4 lakhs are still pending to be paid by the buyer. Now the buyer has to pay only 3 lakhs because goods worth rupees 1 lakh were defective. So buyer need not pay the complete 4 lakh in return. He just have to pay 3 lakhs. Now this is what we are discussing about. So it is a refund that can be initiated into different ways. So there is no specific format where you can say that the refund has to be given in this specific process itself, or there is no process flow for this. So refund can be initiated, and this happens in your daily life as well. You go to a shopping mart, you go to any kind of general store, you go to a stationery shop and you purchase something, and you find something defective, you can give it back to the seller and he might give you a credit note, or he might just replace that part, as it depends on the quantity and it depends on what you are ideally purchasing. So when we talk about credit note or credit memo, this is something that we need to discuss about. Let's figure out the next point. Now the next point refers to, it's a commercial document. Of course it is a commercial document. The reason being, all the transactions that you're doing is not for personal usage or nothing related to personal use. So when we talk about a business transaction, it is absolutely a commercial transaction. So whenever there is a commercial transaction, the refund, or probably whenever the purchase or the sales has been made for commercial purposes, the refund will also be for commercial purpose only. There will be no chance or no query where the personal transaction refunds will be included into accounting transactions of commercial businesses. Hence, make sure the personal transactions are kept away from the accounting transactions, because accounting transactions doesn't allow any kind of transaction which is not of business nature. Only or strictly all business transactions which are referred to in monetary values and can be termed as financial transactions are only recorded into accounting records or accounting transactions. Let's figure out the next point then. It says it's a source document for sales return. Of course, as we discussed earlier, this is completely related to sales return. All the defective goods being sent back to us, or all the defective services being asked for a refund, this specific credit note will act as a source document stating that we have given a refund to the customer and we have a copy of it. So this copy will act as an evidence stating that we have provided a refund of X amount to Mr. A, Mr. B, Mr. C, and this is in regards to the specific refund that is supposed to be given for the description of goods being found as defaulted or being found as faulty. So when we talk about all such kind of faulty items, faulty services, the refunds being given, or the specific credit memo or credit note being offered to the buyer acts as a source document for sales return. Let's figure out the next directions or probably some more details about it on the next sheet. It also acts as evidence for reduction in sales. Now, we as a business, we also have to track out how many sales have happened every month. So there is a month on month tracker that we can keep, where we can monitor that how many sales is happening every month and what is the growth factor here. Because we as a business, we have to run this organization, we have to make sure there are profits, because the profits will lead to more income, will lead to more dividends being given out. And if there is a big organization in question, it also leads to more of the shareholders being attracted to a profitable company, which will also show that the financial structure is absolutely good and there is nothing to worry about when it comes to investing in this specific company. So when you talk about any kind of evidence, you also have to make sure that all the sales returns are also evident or probably audited and further kept for our record, showing that this is the evidence proof, or this is the return, or this is a specific item that shows that there has been a return and there has been a refund which has been initiated for all the buyers. Hence, it acts as an evidence for sales return. We have a word termed as credit memorandum. The word is a different word, however, the function is the same as credit memo. So it is a contraction or a short form of credit memo, which knows or which says as credit memorandum. So the credit memorandum short form can be also called as credit memo. Let's figure out more details on this part. It is also known as reduction in account receivables for seller. Now, why we call it as account receivable for seller? Whenever the sale is done by the seller and it is done towards a customer or a purchaser or a buyer, whatever the concern may be. Now, when we talk about any person being in question, or if the seller is being in question, and if there are sales return, that means there is a reduction in the total sales. Imagine if you have made a sale of rupees 1 crore, however, there has been certain refund or probably certain return that has been made by a customer worth rupees 30 lakhs. So what will be your net sales? Correct. That's going to be 70 lakhs. Now, the records show that the sales were done for 1 crore. However, the final record will show that the net sales has been only 70 lakhs. Now, the difference between this is the sales return. So, it acts as the accounts receivable, or probably credit amount which is supposed to be received is not 1 crore. However, it is 70 lakhs itself, because there is evidence proof with us which shows that there has been a reduction in the value of the sales, and that is because of the sales return or the credit memo. Similarly, it is also an reduction in the value or probably the value of the accounts payable for the buyer. Now, when we talk about reduction in the accounts receivables for seller, similar or vice versa effect is also on the payment that is supposed to be made by the buyer. Now, the buyer was supposed to pay 1 crore. However, there are certain goods that are defective and he has received a credit note for that. That means he is only supposed to pay amount of rupees 70 lakhs as a term, or probably a final amount or a net settlement amount towards the purchase that he has made. So instead of 1 crore, the value has got down to 70 lakhs. So when we talk about reduction in the value of accounts payable and accounts receivable will be for sellers and accounts payable will be for buyers. This will be also a form of explanation that you can give when you have to talk about accounts receivable and accounts payable as a part of returns. Let's figure out some more details on this. Now, the last statement, or probably the last detail, mentions that it can also be used for warranty based issues or previously determined or previously promised discounts. Now, when we talk about credit note, let's take an example. You were promised that you would receive a discount of 10% on the previous purchase that you have made. However, you still haven't received it. Now, the purchase has been already made, you have already made a payment, however you haven't received a discount on it. So for all those discounts that were previously promised, you can offer a credit note for this specific purchase, which will say that we give you 10% discount right now on this specific purchase as a part or a gesture of the previous discount which you couldn't avail because we couldn't provide that part. So when we talk about previous gesture or previous promised deductions or discounts in the net invoice value, that's when we give out a credit memo. And same thing comes for warranty issues. So if there is any warranty which was supposed to be 1 year or more than 1 year, and when we talk about any breach in the warranty, or probably the warranty was not given out for more than 1 year, or probably the required period itself, in such cases we can also give out any kind of issues. Or probably, let's take one more example here. If the specific transaction or the goods or the services found to be defective within the warranty time, that means within the warranty time, if the specific transaction or the specific goods is found defective, they are supposed to be replaced, or a credit note is supposed to be invoiced to the buyer or the purchaser. Let's take an example. You went to an electronics shop, you got a washing machine for yourself, and the warranty on that specific washing machine was for 12 months. At the end of 7th month, you figured out that there is certain voice that is coming out from the compressor of the machine and it is not functioning properly. So you called the seller, you sent the piece back, and it was found that it was defective in nature and cannot be replaced any further or cannot be used for working purposes. Hence, we either give out a whole new machine to the buyer, or we give out a credit note to the buyer. Now that credit note may be in pro rata basis, or whatever the case may be, it is as per the company's policy, or the whole replacement or the whole consignment can be replaced for the buyer as a gesture of goodwill. When we talk about this specific thing talks about the warranty based issues, and the earlier discussion that we had regarding the discounts as a gesture of previously promised discounts can also be formed with the usage of credit note. So when we talk about credit note, all these details are mandatory and form about how a credit note works or credit memo works when we have to talk about accounting transactions. Let's figure out certain examples for this. Now, the example says that Mr. Edward purchased certain clothing apparels from Clothing Suppliers LLC, Limited Liability Corporation. Now, out of all those items, they figured out that one item is defective. There's one more policy of the company that the exchange can be done, or probably the refund can be initiated within 15 days after the purchase. That means the date from when the purchase was made, after which you need to calculate 15 days, and if you figure out there is any defect within those 15 days, you can go ahead and make the exchanges available, and you can further initiate a refund for that, or you can either claim for a replacement. Now, Mr. Edward was really angry with the thought that he has to go back to the store and go ahead and make the necessary changes, or to see whether there can be any refund that can be initiated, or will it be exchanged or not. However, the store manager took over the situation and ensured him that his refunds can be initiated. The reason being, the company policy says that the exchange can be done within 15 days, and Mr. Edward found that out within 15 days itself. Hence, we can go ahead with this specific transaction, or we can go ahead with this specification leading to certain details about how one specific credit memo can be issued. Now, there's one more question here. What do you think will the store manager do? What do you think? What would you do in such a situation? That's correct. You would have given a credit memo to the customer stating that this specific credit memo can be used further for any purchases that you wish to do in near future if he has already made the payment. Now that he has already made the payment here because he figured out after 15 days or probably within the span of 15 days itself. Now that the payment has been made, and he has been given a credit memo that can be used for the next purchases as well. However, we can also give him a refund at that moment itself, stating that this credit memo will be ensured or will be an evidence that the sales return has happened, and Mr. any person or Edward is supposed to be receiving this much amount as a refund. Hence, when we talk about credit memo, these are the details that we need to figure out. Now, there's a specific format for this situation whereby you need to prepare a credit note or a credit memo in the format we'll be discussing right now. Let's prepare that format and then we'll solve certain illustrations about it. Let's go ahead. We'll be preparing the format right now. Let's go ahead and prepare the format first. So this is the basic format that we have prepared here. We'll be explaining you how this format has been prepared and what all details are required. Let's go ahead and highlight each and every point. This refers to the credit memo. That means this shows that this is a credit memo that has been issued by the seller to the buyer. The company name will be reflected in the middle page or probably the top middle of the format or top format of the memo. On the right hand side, you can mention the date there, and on the left hand side, you'll be mentioning the serial number of the memo, because there will be a lot of memos that will be going through or that will be giving through in the whole financial year. Hence, we'll be having a serial number for each of the memo that has been given. Now, the memo will include three basic columns. First, quantity; second, description; and third, rate. The fourth column will refer to the amount. Quantity will describe how much quantity of goods has been sold out or probably given back by the customer to the seller. Description will give details about what kind of goods have been given back by the seller. What were the goods that were sold, and is it the similar thing will be matched after that. The third column will describe about the rate. That means what is the rate per unit. So when we talk about any quantity, the total amount or the amount column will include the total of quantity multiplied by rate per unit. Hence, when we talk about 10 quantities being referred or being returned by the customer and one quantity price is somewhere around 100 rupees, that means the total amount of credit note that has been given to him is worth rupees 1000. 10 into 100, that gives you 1000. So when we talk about any kind of refund or any kind of credit memo, credit note being issued by the seller to the buyer, all these details are very necessary. And the last column will have again the total itself. That means the total amount. Apart from that, terms and conditions will be a part of this, which will be mentioned on the lower bottom of the memo, which says that goods can be exchanged within 15 days after purchase. Any such term and condition which the company fits deemed, or any kind of thing that the company feels that this is the correct policy that they have to order. Like any company might have, or some companies might have 15 days policies, some companies might have 4 days policies, some companies might have 7 days policies or something like that. So these policies of exchange can be mentioned down. That means all the terms and conditions can be mentioned down while the memo is being issued to the customer. So this is how you prepare the credit memo. Let's go through one illustration and you will be able to prepare the credit memo now. We'll note down certain transactions here and you will have to prepare the transaction wise or the credit memo for any of the return transaction. Let's go ahead and prepare that one. Now we have jotted down the illustration for your reference. There is Mrs. ABC and there is Mrs. XYZ in the transactional party. Now Mrs. ABC is a sports equipment dealer. That means sports item dealer. He sells out bats, gloves, pads and everything else which is related to the sport market. Now Mrs. ABC has given certain details of the transactions that were done for the March month 2019, and these all transactions were done with reference to the transactions of Mrs. XYZ. That means all these transactions refer to one specific company, Mrs. XYZ itself. Now, when we talk about all these transactions, there is one transaction where a refund is supposed to be claimed, or there is a certain transaction where a sales return has happened. Now we need to figure out how to prepare a credit memo for this so that Mrs. ABC can give out a credit note to Mrs. XYZ, being there is a long distance relationship between both these owners or probably both these entrepreneurs, and they have been dealing with these kind of transactions, or where there has been a purchase made by Mrs. XYZ from Mrs. ABC for a long time. That means the bonding between both these buyers and sellers is from a long time. So they have to prepare a credit memo, and we'll figure out how to specify all these transactions or how to go through the adjustments and then prepare a credit memo for the same. Let's figure out, or let's go through the transaction first so that you can also note down the details of this specific transaction, and then we can figure out how to prepare the credit memo for you. Let's do that. The question states, Mrs. ABC, a sports equipment dealer, sold out certain consignment of goods to Mrs. XYZ. Now, company has a policy of return in 30 days. That means any goods that is returned by the buyer to the seller within 30 days will be considered for exchange and refund. In the month of March 2019, all these transactions have been referred down here. We'll go through each transaction one by one. Goods purchase rupees 2 lakh. Second transaction refers to goods purchase rupees 4 lakh. Let's go on the third transaction. Purchased gloves both rupees 20,000. Now let's figure out what is the fourth transaction referred to. Purchase bats rupees 50,000. That means bats or consignment of bat worth rupees 50,000 was purchased from Mrs. ABC Limited. Now, the fixed transaction refers to there has been a return that has been done on the transaction, or that refers to the transaction worth rupees 2 lakh. So if you remember, the first transaction was done for rupees 2 lakh itself. There has been a return which has been initiated, or probably there is a sales return that has been happened on that specific transaction itself, whereby 50% of the goods or 50% of the quantity of goods that were delivered to Mrs. XYZ by Mrs. ABC were found to be defective, and 50 quantities, that means the quantity that was sent back by the buyer to the seller, refers to 50 units, each unit amounting to rupees 2,000 each. Now you have to prepare the kind of credit memo that we described in the format, and we'll go ahead how to prepare that thing. Let's prepare that out. Now, if you see, we have prepared the credit memo for you. That means we have exactly prepared the same format that we discussed in the earlier illustration. Now, this specific credit note has been prepared. We will be highlighting each details as to where which detail is supposed to be mentioned. Let's go ahead and do that part. Mrs. ABC Limited, that means the name of the seller will be on the top, middle, bottom side. On the left hand side, there will be a serial number. On the right hand side, there will be a date. There will be 4 columns in total. First, quantity, second, description, third, rate, and the fourth will be amount. Now, as the question stated, 50 quantities were returned back by the buyer. Hence, the quantity column will have the amount or the value as 50. Description will have what quantity of goods were being sent back, and either what quality or what is the description of the goods that are being sent back, as the question never stated what is the kind of goods that are being sent back. Hence we have mentioned the same line, that means goods purchased for rupees 2 lakhs and 50% refund being done here. Now the rate per unit is 2000, that was already mentioned in the question, hence the rate column will have the amount as 2000 and the total amount will be 1 lakh, that is being refunded or probably given as a credit memo. Again, the total will be highlighted and hence the terms and conditions will also mention that the company policies and the return policies, or probably the terms and conditions and the return policy was mentioned in the question, whereby it is mentioned that the returns are accepted only if it is within 30 days after the purchase of goods or the transaction date. So you have to mention all these details, and this is how you prepare a credit memo for your reference. Now we'll further go ahead and understand that if the total quantity here mentioned as 1 lakh or the amount of the value or the specific refund being given to the customer is rupees 1 lakh, this can be either used for next purchases because the payment has been already made, or if he has to make the payment right now, he's supposed to make only a payment of rupees 1 lakh, as 2 lakhs out of bill, or probably the bill amount or the invoice amount originally created was 2 lakh. However, he has a credit note of 1 lakh, and hence this can be further utilized that the payments is supposed to be received from the customer only for rupees 1 lakh. Hence, as we said, that there is a reduction in the value of sales receivables or probably accounts receivables. Hence 2 lakhs went down to 1 lakh, and similarly for the buyer, payments of rupees 2 lakhs went down to 1 lakh. This is how credit memo is prepared. Now let's figure out what do you mean by cash memo. Now, the start of the video itself, we described that there is a lot of difference between credit memo and cash memo. People will think that the transaction where the credit transaction was initiated earlier, and if there is a refund, that refers to credit memo, and where the transactions have been dealt in cash, and if the credit is refund or probably the refund is supposed to be received in cash, that is referred to cash memo. However, that isn't correct. The only difference between credit and cash memo refers to that credit memo is the refund that is initiated. However, cash memo is the invoice or probably a source document evidencing that the sale transaction has happened in cash. So, cash memo is the invoice copy or probably the bill of the transaction referring to transactions happening in cash, or probably giving out the evidence that the purchase transaction or a sales transaction has happened here. This is the difference between a credit memo and the cash memo. Let's figure out few more details on this. It is a document stating cash received for goods sold. That means, as we discussed, that it is a source document which shows that there has been a receipt of cash for the goods being sold to the customer. Hence, we give out this cash memo to our customers, and a bill copy is kept with us for our reference, which can be used in the near future to analyze or reconcile any kind of cash sales that has been done. Hence, this is a source document which states that the cash has been received from the customer and the bill has been given to him. This also refers to paid bills for cash sales. This means that any kind of bill that you receive as a buyer, that means you have already paid the bill and there is a specific acknowledgement receipt that you receive or a memo that you receive stating the descriptions of the transaction that has been referred to and the amount that has been paid. Hence, when we talk about cash memo, this is all it relates to. It also acts as an evidence for sale. So if you have bought certain goods from a store and if you have figured out that there is a specific kind of defect in it, and you have to further go ahead and refund that specific transaction, or you have to make a replacement order, then in such cases, how would you prove that there has been a transaction in the first place? Exactly. This cash memo will help you give out all those evidences that the transaction took place in the shop, and hence you are asking for a refund for any kind of defect that you have found in the goods. Let's see that you have gone to a shopping mart, you have purchased certain clothing items, and later on you figured out that there is a spot on the cloth that you have purchased. Now, how will you prove that this specific cloth was purchased from this shop itself? Now that you have a credit memo or probably a specific cash memo with you that will define that this specific transaction happened in this shopping mart and this specific item has been purchased from this shop. So all these details will be mentioned in that cash memo. We'll be understanding that when we're preparing the format of it. Let's figure out a few more details on this part. Now, sometimes you don't make the payment in the first hand basis. You either make the payment when you receive the bill or either when you receive the invoice. So whenever if the services are provided to our customers and we give them a bill, an itemized bill rather. Let's take your Vodafone mobile bill or any kind of mobile bill that you have. If you have a postpaid connection with you, the bill that is being sent to you is after the service charge or probably all the service tenure being done. So if the monthly calculation happens 15th of every month, so from 16th of August until 16th of September or probably 15th of September, that will be the period for which bill will be calculated and it will be sent to you in the next few days. That means either it will be sent on 16th of September, 17th of September, 18th of September, whenever it may be. After that, you have to make the payment. So that specific transaction or that specific memo being sent to you shows that there has been a transaction or there has been a usage of service for which the amount is supposed to be paid by the buyer. Hence, it also acts as an evidence for the payment that is supposed to be received from the buyer. And not every time that we say that a sales copy or an invoice copy shows that anytime we have paid the amount, we have a receipt for it. So similar to that, we also have a receipt or probably this specific cash memo which shows that some amount is supposed to be received from the buyer. So just like the buyer where the amount has been paid by the buyer, this also looks that there has been an amount which is supposed to be received from the buyer and the seller is supposed to receive that from the buyer, and hence we have a copy here which states that there is a cash memo for the buyer as well, there is a cash memo for the seller as well. Let's figure out a few more details. It is equivalent to the invoice of cash sales. So whenever there is a cash sale, if you give out a cash memo, that is equivalent to the invoice. So you need not generate any further invoice on that. Mostly you would have figured that out when you go or you figure out the difference between a shopping mart and a general store. Both these things have the same detail, but a shopping mall generates an electronic invoice receipt. However, a normal regular general store will give you on a paper piece. That means a piece of paper which has all the details of the quantity that you have purchased, the rate and the total amount and the payment that has been made into. Like the payment can be made in cash, it can be made via card, it can be made via bank transfer or using all the electronical transactions or applications that we have for making the transactions these days. So when you have all these details, the only difference is that it is equivalent or probably it is different from an invoice. However, the value or the functioning of this specific cash memo will be equivalent to the invoice itself. So both are admissible. Every such cash memo is prepared in pair. That means in duplicate copy is kept with the seller for his reference. Whenever a cash memo is prepared, for example, you must have seen in your childhood there has been a blue carbon paper or a black carbon paper that is kept below the bill. That specific thing is done so that whatever the seller writes on that specific memo is also copied under the carbon paper as a duplicate copy. This thing is kept by the seller for his reference so that whenever in near future he has to reconcile his sales, he has to make any tax payment, he has to do any analysis on the kind of sales that has been done, this will help him for all his references. This is also used for reconciliation, tax payment, cash management, analysis of sales, etc. So as we discussed earlier, that a sales copy, that means a duplicate copy, is kept with the seller so that he can make any kind of analysis on cash sales, he can make the tax payments, he can further go ahead and see how the cash management is going on, etc. All these details are required for his references. Now the cash memo also includes certain details. That means date, this is the first thing, details of the transactions or probably description of the details, or whenever we talk about description of the specific goods being sold out, or the transaction details can also be mentioned here. Third would be quantity, how much quantity is being sold out to the buyer. Fourth would be rate per item. That means what is the rate of each and every good that is being sold out to the buyer. Fifth would be the gross total, which will be excluding taxes. That means taxes hasn't been added to this part. As you know that any of the transactions these days approve or attract all the kind of taxes. That means service tax, GST, etc. has been attracted to this thing. Hence, gross total will include only the amount that is supposed to be a part of any amount which is excluding tax. Next part would be taxes. And when we talk about taxes, this will be the GST that is applied on every transaction, 18%, or state-wise bifurcation, whichever may be, as may be mentioned in the question, you can go with that. And the last part would be net total and terms and conditions. So when we talk about net total and terms and conditions, all these details will be included in a cash memo. Now we'll be seeing how the format of cash memo looks like, and we'll prepare an illustration based on that. Let's figure that out. So the cash memo has all these details mentioned here. Now the specific details, it is equivalent how the credit memo is prepared. All the details are same. There is no change apart from the name on the top of it. That means first showed credit memo, second will show cash memo. The top middle part will show company's name and address mentioned below it. On the left or the either right side there will be a logo. It can be as per the company's discretion. On the top right side, you will find date, where the date will be mentioned as to the which transaction or which date all these transactions took place. And on the left, there will be a serial number. This serial number will show that there has been a refund or any kind of bill which has been generated for the purchases. This serial number will be the identifier for that specific transactions or that specific person. The four columns will remain common. That means quantity, description, rate, and amount. Again, on the bottom right hand side, you will find total amount, which will show what is the rate, quantity total, and the total amount itself for which the purchases has been made. Because in this specific memo, you will be mentioning different items altogether. So each quantity or each item will have different rate, different quantity being purchased, and the total amount will be different. Hence, this total will show the exact total of all the details. Hence, this is the detail or this is the transaction that we're talking about. Terms and conditions will show what are the terms and conditions as mentioned in the question. That means exchange policy or return fares or warranty, etc. will be a part of this. Let's figure out with one illustration on this part. So the question has been prepared. We have Mrs. AB Limited, who is an hardware store supplier. Now, he has done certain transactions on 10th of March 2019 with Mr. Hassan. Mr. Hassan is the name of the customer. There are certain items that have been jotted down here. We'll note them down for your reference and then we'll prepare the cash memo after understanding what are the certain terms and conditions. Let's figure that out. First item that was sold to Mr. Hassan was 10 pieces of extension boxes at the rate of rupees 100 each. Let's go on to the second item. 20 pieces of conductors at rupees 150 each were also sold to Mr. Hassan. 3 cartons of screws at rupees 2000. That means total 3 cartons or the 3 cartons worth rupees 2000 were sold to Mr. Hassan. 4 boxes of Fevicol and cutters were also sold to Mr. Hassan, the total worth being rupees 5,000. Now we have to prepare a cash memo here, and there has been certain terms and conditions that have been mentioned down here. First being, exchange is available only within 7 days after the date of transaction and no warranty on the goods. Let's prepare the cash memo. I hope the sum is very clear and easy to understand. Let's go ahead and make the format again. Before we could make the format, there is one more thing that we would highlight here. First being, GST is charged at the rate of 4%. So when we prepare this thing, there are certain taxes that will be added here. We can prepare that part at the end of it and will prepare 4% GST on that part. I'll figure out how to prepare that thing, and you will need to know how to prepare or how to add taxes here. Let's go and make that part. So we'll record the first transaction whereby we had sold certain items to Mr. Hassan. Now, when we record all these transactions, make sure all the transactions are recorded in the chronological order for your better understanding. So the first transaction refers to 10 extension boxes being sold to Mr. Hassan at rupees 100 each. Let's record the second transaction. Second transaction refers to 20 conductors being sold at rupees 150 each. Let's record the third transaction. The second transaction or the third transaction refers to 3 cartons of screws being sold out to Mr. Hassan, the total worth rupees 2000. Hence, there has been no rate mentioned. You can just mention the dash here, or you can divide it and you can get the rate per unit or per carton. Now that we have mentioned all the items, we'll first total and get the gross total amount, on which we'll apply GST, that is at the rate 4%, and then we'll figure out what is the net total there. So now that we have prepared this cash memo, as you can see that the gross total is 11,000, on which we have charged GST at the rate 4%, getting a total of 440 rupees, and the total amount being 11,440 being the final amount or the net amount that is supposed to be paid by Mr. Hassan, or which has been already paid by the Hassan. Hence, we don't know here. We'll just assume that this is the bill amount. Terms and conditions have been mentioned at the end of it, whereby we have mentioned no warranty on goods sold, and the second will be exchanges being done only within 7 days after the date of transaction. So at any point of time, this exchange will not be accepted after 18th of March. So from 17th or probably from 10th until 17th of March, that is the only date between which we can go ahead and make the refunds or probably get for replacements if there is any defect found. Hence, this is how you prepare the cash memo. I suppose this video was very clear about how to prepare credit memo, how to prepare cash memo, and what is the difference between both of them. So thank you for watching this video. Stay tuned with Ekeeda and keep subscribing to Ekeeda.